Hi there, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. We welcome you to the Wednesday ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazweta, ACSA's Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. We welcome your questions and comments. Say hello where you're watching from. Tell us what district you're at, what's going on in your district today. Edgar, so good to have you back today. It was an incredible night and a very busy day that we have clearly had today.
Oh, yeah. I think we're all still trying to recover, drinking those extra cups of coffee. I wear this Whoop band, which tells me how good I'm doing at sleeping or not. And I didn't need the band to tell me last night or this morning that, yeah, I didn't get enough sleep. I couldn't help myself. Even when I tried, I woke up in the middle of the night to check results to see where the votes were standing. And we're still watching, and we're going to be watching for a little while here.
Yeah, we're going to give you some updates on that as we move forward in the show, because we know some of you have obviously been at work. Others of you are at Leadership Summit, and you're taking some time away from Leadership Summit to watch our show, to participate. So thank you very much for being with us. Again, Leadership Summit is going on. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. Let's get you some updates first. We'll pull you out of the the presidential election information. And let's talk about COVID-19 here in the state, Edgar, because we have just wrapped up the governor's noon news conference where Mark Galley, the secretary from the California Health and Human Services, was on there. And you've got some late information right now about counties on the purple, red, orange levels and school reopenings.
Yeah, it used to be, Naj, our old ritual used to be waiting 12 o'clock. The governor would have a press conference almost every day. Now they've backed off of that. But now one of my new rituals is every Tuesday. It was Wednesday this week because of the election. Was watching Dr. Galley hold his weekly press conference. And what happens here is they make announcements on where counties are at in this blueprint for a safer economy, in terms of who's moving from purple to red, who's moving red to orange. And now, unfortunately, one of the things we have to be on the lookout for, if for counties regressing and actually moving back from to a more restrictive tier. And that was one of the pieces that I was looking out for in terms of how it impacts schools, namely two pretty big counties. One, because we live in it, Sacramento and San Diego, it appears, missed the first week of their targets. And to remind everybody on how the system works, if you miss 2 weeks of your metrics, depending on the tier you're in, you move backwards. And as it relates to schools that are in purple have to only provide distance learning unless they got a waiver, or here comes the tricky part, unless they were already open while they were in red. And if you move back to purple, there's no requirement that you actually close. Then there's other metrics of depending on cases. All that to say, now it does raise some questions for a number of school districts, not just here in Sacramento, but also in San Diego, that were in the midst of their planning process and have actually identified dates for opening. A lot of them were looking to, later this month, even into January. What happens to that if in the course of that planning, the county goes to a more restricted tier? So there's going to be a lot more to say on that piece.
Yeah, and Edgar, it is really interesting because you had that information about Sacramento County. We talked last week about Elk Grove Unified had their plan and how they were being driven by data, and that new information coming in from Mark Galley about Sacramento County, because right next door is Placer County, where we have Roseville City School District opening up today. That's to in-person. So that's elementary and junior high schools over there in the Roseville area right next door. So it's like, it really depends on which county you're at and which side of the border you're at for these numbers to be fluctuating from one side to the other. I mean, it's a day-to-day kind of thing.
It's a reminder, if nothing else. I mean, obviously the national election, this was one, and we're going to transition to that topic. This was one of the biggest talking points is how COVID and the pandemic is impacting our lives. And I think as it relates to California and as it relates to our members and our students and our schools, that this is ever present, right? And I know that as we enter the flu season, and we've been hit over the head about all the repercussions of moving into winter, it is a reminder that even as California is doing very well, and I think that was another message that came out of the secretary's press conference, compared to where other states are at, our positivity rate is at 3%. Some states, just to give context, they're in the 20s. I think there's even a couple that are in the 30% positivity rate. We're at 3%, right? 3.3 to be exact. But it does remind us all, and I know we say this over, and everybody says this over. I know it makes me think, hey, if I want my kids to go to school, to stay in school, what can I do better, right? Where's that time where, if in doubt, like, wear the mask, don't do those activities. So it's definitely one of those reminders.
And we want to say hello to Sunny over there in Mendocino County Office of Ed, Ellen, Maura, Michelle, our great member, Gary Reller, who is watching every single week. Gary, so good to have you. Jan and Maria Thompson are one of our ACSA board members. Muhammad is on from Elk Grove Unified today. Muhammad back with us, and Holly Eads, our former president. So good to have all of you with us. Again, we invite your questions and comments. Say hello where you're coming in from today. Because some of you have not had access to information, let me just go ahead and give you a couple of pieces of information from the last 90 minutes on the 2020 presidential election. Two networks with opposing views. So I had to make sure, Edgar, that I looked for opposing views to get some type of context and some type of validity to this. Two networks calling Joe Biden the apparent winner in Wisconsin. That would get him up to 237 electoral votes. President Trump with 214 currently. However, the Trump campaign says today that it will immediately call for a recount. I had to look up the recount rules in some of these states that are very close. And in Wisconsin, when the margin is less than 1%, that can trigger a recount, which is exactly where it's at. The Trump campaign has filed a lawsuit to stop the vote count in Michigan due to what they are calling an access issue over there. As far as recounts are concerned, it's automatic at 2,000 votes or fewer, or for a candidate request. And the vote count continues in Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. So let me just ask you, Edgar, what did election night look like in your house as you were going through this, knowing so much was going to happen even into this morning?
You know what? I think I prepped myself mentally. Like, I went about it as a regular day. Usually in a non-pandemic year, given my capacity, my job, we'll get invited to some election parties here around town. There's usually a lot of activity in Sacramento. Obviously, that wasn't happening. So it was a pretty ordinary night, aside, from falling asleep, maybe having a glass of wine, watching results there, and then waking up in the middle of the night, realizing, like, where are the numbers at? But it was a different type of year, and again, we'll say this many times, it wasn't election day, it's election week now. So we're still at it today. Still at it. Exactly right. Mary and Amy and Carol, so good to have you. All right, let's move our focus right over to the election. We are joined today by political expert, the president and partner over at Capital Advisors, Kevin Gordon, with us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Kevin, so good to have you. I want to ask you that we're 17 hours essentially from when the polls closed here in California. Let's get your initial reaction when you went to sleep last night, and then when you woke up this morning, and I know you turned on the news to get the updates, reaction there as well.
Yeah, I mean, we actually flipped on the TV every 2 hours. Check out the latest. So set the alarm, check it again, set the alarm, check it again. Yeah, just fascinating, obviously, for anybody that loves politics to watch the unfolding of this election. I think probably the one biggest surprise for me was the fact that, pollsters, regardless of what your side you're on this thing, seem to have got it wrong again. So it's a shame on me moment. But they've got it wrong in a number of different ways. I was taking a look at some of the statewide ballot measures as well that showed a lot, tighter race where there wasn't such a tight race. And then in the presidential race, a lot tighter race. And obviously the Republicans did far better than I think all the pundits and a lot of the polling would have suggested they were going to do. But kind of like Edgar, because of what happened 4 years ago, I went into it with kind of, a jaundiced view of what the processes be, knowing that it was probably pretty much a toss-up about where things would ultimately end up. So, it comes down to the wire here. There are a lot of implications that we're looking at of the overall election, both at the state and national level, in terms of its implications for our schools.
Hey, Kevin, like you and many of us, I'm definitely a political nerd, and I lived off of 538 for the last months, and knew all the percentages, and so I was right there with you in terms of the polling. Now, in terms of the election results, and both nationally or even what we saw here in California, what else caught your eye? What surprised you in terms of big takeaways there?
There were a couple of things. Number one is, again, I would expect maybe some of the Republicans to hold even, perhaps, or Democrats to even gain seats. There were a lot of rumors, a lot of polling that would have suggested that. But when you took a look at it, particularly in California, and we know it's not over yet, there could be actually more than 6 overall House gains by Republicans now that we're looking at results. Interesting that 3 of those were here in California, where they actually flipped back to Republican hands seats that the Democrats had won either in 2018 or in 2016, back in the hands of Republicans. So that was one of the issues that surprised me. The other issue was the totality of money spent on ballot measures in California. Nearly $800 million just on California ballot propositions. And every one of you are voters. So you all know, and you saw the same mail that I saw, is the incredible avalanche of mail, TV advertising. I mean, there was more political mail and sort of political propaganda out there in this election that I can ever remember before. And it was coming at us from almost a dozen different ballot measures that were incredibly well funded.
Gary Reller, one of our longtime viewers, asks a question, with the Republicans holding the Senate, no matter who wins president, do you think there will be a relief bill passed? And that leads me into another question is, as the prospects look like the Republicans are going to hold the Senate, do you think that impacts us here in California about federal support?
Yeah, no question that if Trump is reelected, and obviously there's the chance that could happen, if Trump is reelected, I do think that they will move very quickly to get an extra round of stimulus, and it'll be big. The quotes before the election by the president were that he wanted to go big, and he bragged that he wanted a package that was bigger than either the Senate or House had proposed. So the last of the negotiations before the election, the number had gotten as high as $1.8 trillion. Speaker Pelosi had a $2.2 trillion compromise proposal on the table, obviously holding out for a bigger number there. But I do think the president realized as he was getting closer to the election that the economy was starting to sputter, and we were starting to see the impact of there not being that 5th round of stimulus that had been talked about for some time. Clearly, if Biden had gotten elected and was had the Senate as well, we'd be looking at probably a stimulus package in the range of the House's original proposal, which was $3.4 trillion. But I think we're probably going to get something anyways. Just while we've been talking, Mitch McConnell came out with a statement saying that we really do need to get another stimulus package done, and it needs to be done before the end of the calendar year. That's actually a really good sign. And I think one of the things that Senate Republicans might recognize, that in the event that Biden does get elected, or really in any case, they need to move on that. And that if Biden does get elected, I'm sure it's occurring to them that, they're not going to have both houses up against a Democrat White House. That if Biden does win, they're going to be pretty isolated in the Senate with a House that's Democrat, a White House that's Democrat, if that were to happen, and that they would be facing the prospects of not getting anything they want done either. And knowing sort of Biden's style, which is the consummate negotiator and has a track record of reaching across the aisle, he would want to try to forge compromises to get things done. The real question is whether Mitch McConnell Republicans want to revert to kind of the nature that Edgar, you and I were talking about, that you were reminiscing that they'd sort of done before during the Obama administration, which you might want to elaborate on.
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's good news that you shared about, regardless of who wins, if there's already some indication that they want to get something done, I think that's positive across the board. Yeah, my fear, obviously, if we do end up with a split control, if Biden wins, but yet at least the Senate is in control of, if the Republicans are in control in the Senate under Obama, I mean, one of the things that not a lot got done, or at least bipartisanship, because the Republicans really took the perspective of that they were going to be the loyal opposition to pretty much anything that the president at the time. So hopefully this is a different sentiment, regardless of who comes out on top. Yeah. Kevin, going back to California, and one of the things that we've been watching real closely here, and we had a whole show about it, is Proposition 15, the Schools and Communities First Initiative, or split roll, or really looking at reassessing Proposition 13 for commercial property. And so the polling had been real tight, but this really was seen as a big lift. Kind of right now, it looks like it's trending towards failing. But then again, especially in California, we've learned this. We learned this a few years ago with the superintendent's race. We've learned this with other initiatives. There's still a lot of votes to count. But kind of what's your perspective on that, and any lessons that were taken away, even from early on, showing that despite the amount of money, despite the unified support on this, that this is really a difficult issue to get past?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that this would be one of the few exceptions where the polling had it pegged almost exactly right. So they were never able to get, the proponents were never able to get above 50% during the campaign. You're right about that place right now. The one thing that I always thought would swing it would be in California, the deep blue state that it is, a really disproportionate left of center electorate beyond what we would otherwise anticipate actually getting over the finish line. The other thing was the remarkable lack of funding that was expected on the no side. I think this would have been a bigger defeat for Prop 15 if they had actually spent the kind of money we were expecting them to spend, and they did not. They were outspent by a number of other campaigns that were on the ballot. The Prop 22 campaign, that Uber campaign, spent $226 million on that campaign, got spent. It pales in comparison to what was spent overall in the Prop 15 campaign. And for the longest time, right up to the end of the campaign, the yes side was outspending the no side. I think that shifted at the end. I think they did a whole lot more TV at the end. They got much more intense at the end. And that's what made it really the challenge, is that, revisiting the third rail of California politics, Prop 13, and they used that. The other thing, frankly, that the opponents used very effectively, and you might have seen the ads, they literally closed 3 different versions of an ad. They closed each of those versions with the statement that schools only would get, at least in their estimate, 30% of the money. That was a closing argument. And it was one of the vulnerabilities that we pointed out to the proponents from the day they drafted their ballot measure. We thought it was a flaw. That if you're going to use education as a leverage point with voters, they want to know that the bulk of the money is going there. So I think there's a lot to learn here. I think, honestly, the election result, even if it's a squeaker and it passes, there's a lot to learn in terms of what ACSA was advocating from the beginning, which is that we ought to not be negotiating with ourselves. We ought to be pushing ballot measures that help education and stop trying to share the largesse of our public policy goals with other kinds of purposes. I think it undermines our effort in the long run, and it's not in step with where the voters are at.
All right, Kevin, I'm going to combine 2 questions here. The first one about Prop 16, since that seems to be headed for a decisive defeat. So what do you think happened with that campaign? And then our great board member, Region 3, Daniel Hernandez from Sac City Unified, he asks, do you have any surprises from the proposition? So let's hit 16 and then maybe some of the other initiatives and surprises that came from there.
Yeah, and I think the problem with Prop 16 is that voters just didn't see an imperative there. One of the things that's an axiom about ballot measures is that people, if they're going to vote for a measure, they need to be really clear and understand what it's all about. And because there wasn't enough money in that campaign to really raise the consciousness of voters about why was it important, what was the imperative, there were too many other messages going on regarding the ballot that drowned that out. So what they had to rely upon was basically the language in the ballot measure, and then maybe what little they were hearing from it on the outside. And I think it was one of those things where we say people vote for ballot measures because they know what it is and they agree with its philosophy. And I think if there's any confusion at all, and if you looked at the no campaign, what little of a campaign there was, it definitely created confusion about what this really meant. And those confusing messages always accrue to the benefit of a no vote. People do not vote for things if they're confused or they don't really know what it is. They won't vote yes. So they tend to vote no on those kinds of measures. And then with regard to surprises, just across the different ballot measures, again, the thing that probably surprised me the most was the magnitude of the spending. It just was incredible. So if you take a look at Prop 22, they spent almost $630,000 a day between June and Election Day. So every single day. So they were spending some really big money on that campaign, throughout the campaign, and obviously we see there was a number of other very expensive ballot measures, like the one on dialysis spent really heavy money. The one that was on rent control, we saw that spending the kind of money that, again, these combined are just breaking records in and of themselves.
Hey, Kevin, we don't get the opportunity to break news here very often on this show, so we'll take the liberty of being able to do that. CNN reporting as of right now that they are calling Michigan for Joe Biden. As we started the show, Biden had a small lead. The Trump campaign was filing a lawsuit to stop the vote count in Michigan due to what they were calling an access issue. But CNN reporting at this hour that Joe Biden has taken Michigan. They have called it for Joe Biden. We're still working to get confirmation from a couple of other places before we can absolutely count on that. But Edgar, keep going.
Well, that's big news, because I think that as it stands this morning, assuming that Arizona, and I think the AP had already called Arizona, it really came down to Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And essentially who wins 2 out of those 3 is probably the next president, right? Assuming Nevada doesn't change, assuming everything else holds true. So there could be, while there's talk about this dragging on for days, this could be over today. So going back to California, Kevin, one of the other pieces, and no surprise, I mean, this is a trend, California has become as blue as you can be, right? From constitutional officers, and we were dissecting some of the numbers this morning, and I think in the legislature, Democrats are going to pick up even a couple more seats. So there's going to be even less Republicans in the state legislature. So ramifications of that, obviously we've already had a legislature that is predominantly Democrat. But from a policymaking standpoint, from the impact of how it impacts schools and the policymaking, kind of what's your perspective on just it shifting even more blue? What will that mean?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things for us in public education generally is that, but particularly because we represent management, there are issues that are outside of just, do you love public schools? But where are you on some of the labor management issues? Where are you on some of the issues that we face as employers? And that's why sometimes some balance really is helpful. In the Senate, they will have an 80% margin in the state Senate, adding 4 additional Democrats to their roster amongst Democrats in the California State Senate. That's just unheard of. It's the largest margin maybe in my lifetime, which is probably a longer period of time than I'd want to admit. But it's a long, long time that we've not had margins that were ever this big It could be even historically high for the state Senate. Interestingly, in the Assembly, they did end up having a lot of targeted seats. The Democrats had Republicans in their sights to try to take out, and they didn't do so well over in the Assembly. So it didn't quite work out that way. But yes, one of the things we always say is our friends are not people with little D's or R's after their name. It's people that do good public policy in K-12 education. And again, there are a number of issues that are either HR related or labor management related, some of these types of issues where we want there to be some really considered review of some of those issues. And we've seen them happen before. I know that many of us have been frustrated with budget deals that happen at the dead of night where something gets snuck through. It's just really bad public policy, would not really stand the light of day of a real public policy hearing, and it gets shoved into the budget and through the process. That's when this becomes the most dangerous, when there's that kind of power. Things like that occur, and it gives us very little chance to really shine some good public policy debate over those arguments. So we should be a little concerned about that. We should be asking the leadership of both houses to make sure that they're consulting with ACSA before they move forward on ideas like that, so we can at least have some suggestions to the things that they might contemplate doing, even if they're going to roll over us with a cement truck. If we could give them some ideas of parts of their proposal that are simply not workable, it could be really helpful.
And folks, we want to let you know we've got members of the ACSA News team working to get some additional confirmation on the news that we reported to you just a couple of moments ago about CNN calling the state of Michigan for Joe Biden. So we're still working to confirm that. Kevin, we do have a question that's coming from Gary Reller. He asks, what impact will the court ruling against Governor Newsom and executive orders have on education? Do you see some type of landscape there and what impact that will have?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure that the administration wouldn't want to appeal that case because, again, it's a test of gubernatorial power in the throes of an emergency. So and they feel pretty strongly that they're in the right on this. So I could see the governor pushing that up to a Supreme Court, where increasingly between Jerry Brown and Governor Newsom that they have a court there that would be sympathetic, I think, to some of their arguments. But at the same time, the legislature did act on some of the more significant parts of what the governor's executive orders were. So it kind of made it a moot point. The legislature acted, and the governor did sign follow-up legislation that in fact imposed the exact same, kind of elements of some of the executive orders that he in fact had promulgated. So, in real practicality, there isn't a really big implication of the court's action on what the subjects were, which were regarding the election and some other matters. But what really matters is the authority of the governor during emergency times, what he has the authority to do and doesn't do. And I think you can expect to see that this story is not over yet.
Hey, Kevin, as we kind of turn the corner on the election and now start looking into 2021, kind of what do you see on the horizon? Obviously, we have to see where these chips fall and what the final count is, not only at the federal level, what happens here in California, but politically. Let's assume for a second, I know this is dangerous, but let's assume that if things continue on this trend and we have a new president, we have a new administration, what does that mean for California? What does that mean for our landscape, for our political leadership here, and then moving forward more practically for our schools, for the budget? What do you foresee?
Well, and it's not to be partisan, it's just sort of be realistic. And even all my Republican friends would acknowledge that if Joe Biden becomes president, there are going to be proposals that are a heck of a lot bigger in terms of dollar amount to try to help backfill schools across the country that are struggling in states where they might be facing budget cuts. And I think you can anticipate seeing those proposals. The challenge is going to be with a Republican-controlled Senate is there's going to have to be quite a debate about that, and who knows what comes out of that process. Again, you just never know if Donald Trump were to succeed and retain the White House, what the magnitude of support is that we could be looking at. But in either case, we are going to be looking for what kind of assistance can we get that furthers or builds upon what we got in the current year. Because the year that I think all of us share an opinion about, which is that the year that we're concerned about is the year that starts July 1. And how do we keep some basic support for public education that will dovetail nicely with an economic basic recovery that gets us to a place where we're not cutting public education and we can get beyond these deferrals. So first order of business is California's economy's got to grow enough, and we got to have a combination of federal assistance to deal with these deferrals so that we actually create the opportunity to use the deferrals again if we need them. And then ultimately get some kind of a safety net. And it's what calls for all of us to be active in our communication with legislators before the end of the calendar year about the fiscal implications to schools if we are not insulated from budget cuts in that new year. So that's really going to be framing up the debate for where we're headed.
Hey, Kevin, we are past the bottom of the hour. So as we get ready to say goodbye to you, I want to ask, I'm sure Capital Advisors every single year, every single time there's an election, does some type of watch party or election night event. And I'm wondering, with people working from home, what that event was like for you guys yesterday, and you can give us the inside scoop on if anybody had that lampshade on the head moment that would surprise us. What do you have for us, Kevin? What can you tell us?
Well, the one thing is that we've all gotten good at is when to try to turn the camera off, or some are better than others. But it was remarkable that we got together. We did not want to be on our Zoom call all night, but you were absolutely right. A whole bunch of political folks in one firm. We did, in fact, schedule to get together sort of in mid-evening, and we did all kind of chime in. And guess what? There was not a lot of news. And people were picking out their favorite races to see what the status of things were. And they were commenting on surprises that turned out actually different by the time we got to this morning. Races like Jay Obernolte's race, where we thought, oh my gosh, Obernolte is not going to Congress. And this morning, it looks like he absolutely is headed to Congress in that race. But a number of races that people were looking at, Donna Shalala's race in Florida, that she lost her seat in Congress. That was a surprise. And we were all kind of trading stories about the different nuances of that we were looking at. But the one point, I was on the call, and there was stuff going on, in my living room while people were watching TV, my two boys and my wife. And I, of course, had the camera off because I was transitioning from that room to the other room. And my wife reminded me that camera better not be on. And so I quickly got to another room and then was surprised to see how many of the team actually had their cameras on and they were ready to share their perspectives. Obviously, everybody very casual. One of the staff members who's a connoisseur of good Scotch and bourbons was definitely enjoying that pastime. And as he was making certain comments about, the politics, I said a few more of those drinks and he'll sound as interesting as our Jerry Shelton does when he's only drinking water. So it was good. It was fun.
You
Kevin
guys
Gordon.
have a fun team over there. I could imagine the back and forth there, Kevin.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Kevin Gordon, president and partner, Capital Advisors. Kevin, thanks so much for being with us today. Really appreciate all of your time.
Great. It's great to be with all of you guys and all the leadership that ACSA continues to provide.
Thanks, Kevin. Enjoy the rest of the post-election news that comes out over the next couple of days.
We will all be in touch for sure.
All right. And Mary and John, you guys asked two really good questions, and I want to let you know that we're going to hold on to those and talk about those in our next show because I want to make sure that we get you some substantive answers on those. And Edgar, I got to tell you, one, I love breaking news. This takes me back to my old news days where I would sit at the anchor desk and just have to ad-lib because of news that was coming in. But my favorite, Gail Olson, who is a longtime ACSA member of our retirement committee, she tells me every single year, I go to the Leadership Summit. It's great. It's fantastic. Only Gail Olson would pull herself out of Leadership Summit to break the news to us that NBC News is projecting Biden to win Michigan. That's a commitment.
I love that. I see how excited you, Michael, Gianna, all news folks, so former reporters, news anchors, and I see how you guys start to geek out on, when we start getting into that flow. So it's fun to go along with the ride with you guys.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, folks, we just mentioned Leadership Summit. Leadership Summit is going on right now. It's been going on all week long. Our first virtual ACSA Leadership Summit, more than 50 pre-recorded workshops, which have been available since November 2nd. They'll be available till November 10th. But we have 2 days of live coverage for you. Here's a preview of Leadership Summit. And folks, my promise to you, this is not another Zoom meeting. I'm going to tell you that right now. This is not another Zoom meeting. ACSA 2020 Leadership Summit. Register right now. You can see the URL right there, ACSA.org/Leadership Summit. My staff, Edgar, gives me a hard time every time I come up on one of these meetings. They're playing Where's Naj Broadcasting From Today, because there's some, as you know, there's some different background. So today I'm actually in the Leadership Summit Broadcast Center, where we'll be for 20 hours of live coverage over these next couple of days. And you and me tomorrow, 4:15,
yes,
the happy hour edition of this show. Folks, we have mystery guests on that show. Edgar and I have no idea who's going to drop by, and it's live TV, so this could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, as this thing goes out, we're going to have more political news to talk about. Never any shortage conversations. I look forward to that.
Absolutely. Folks, thanks so much for being with us today. Enjoy your post-election. Enjoy the rest of the next couple of days. And folks, we'll see you at Leadership Summit tomorrow, 4:15, the happy hour edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Edgar, we'll see you tomorrow. Everybody, have a great day.